Church, how about a round of applause for the music team? Thank you, Keith, CJ, Shara, Zed. Appreciate what you guys, you serving us this morning and bringing your gifts to the congregation. And I'm glad to be with you guys here this morning as well. I told you I heard from Sonia yesterday evening. And then I learned if I had just waited to respond about 30 minutes, then Terry would have taken the sermon, and I'd have been home free. But that's the past. Here we are. You got to live in the present moment. Am I right, Keith? Yes. Anise, thank you for sharing your story. If it makes you feel any better, Sharon and I honeymooned in Kerrville, Texas, so at least she went broke in France. So just a reminder, Sonia does request prayers, and she was absolutely wanting you guys to know what was going on with her. So just remember them, keep them in your thoughts and prayers. I don't really have an update since last night, so some of you probably know more than I do, but just be mindful of that situation. Like I said before, my name is Matt Hines. I've been here before. I'm a friend of the church, and I have friends in the congregation. If you don't know me, you may know my wife Sharon or my daughter Hannah. They're very good people. If you get a chance to hang out with them, you should just say yes and go for it. You'll be blessed. And I am currently a therapist by trade. I sit down with people one-on-one and journey with them through life's struggles. It is a great job. It's a wonderful career. To me, it's the best job in the world. I kind of feel like I was born to do it. So it's a wonderful feeling, and I know that it's not something everybody gets to experience, to like be driving to work and realize, hey, I don't have that angst about what am I supposed to be doing with my life, you know. It took a long time to get there. I've been a school teacher, I've been a pastor, and those were cool gigs, but nothing beats just sitting with somebody and going through the journey that way. But I still welcome opportunities like this to pretend I'm a pastor again, and I'll try not to be too heretical. But if you're going to be heretical, I think unity is probably the best place, right? Am I right? Yeah. So I understand Reverend Sonia's been on a prosperity series, and so today we're going to do, our theme is spiritual prosperity. And to frame our discussion, I wanted to share with you a story I saw involving Dr. Maya Angelou, who, if I'm not mistaken, actually was a Unity member, and that was her tradition, and she had a deep spiritual life. I was watching an interview with Maya Angelou, and she talked about she was asked to give a cameo, being a cameo in a movie called Poetic Justice, directed by John Singleton, which is a Janet Jackson movie. And on set, Tupac Shakur, the rap artist, was also in that movie. And on set, Tupac Shakur was having conflict with another young man. It was getting very heated and really intense. And Maya Angelou approached him, not knowing anything about who he was, not knowing that he was famous or anything like that. And she just said, "May I speak with you?" And he was fuming and cussing and blah, blah, blah. And she said, "I understand, but may I speak with you?" Finally, he agreed, and she took him aside, and she said to him, has anyone, or when's the last time someone told you how important you are? Wow. And then she went on to speak words of love and encouragement to the point where Tupac Shakur was in tears, and apparently called his mother after that, who called Maya Angelou after that. What I love about that story, though, is it kind of is sort of like bookends for our discussion today. It gives us a picture of spiritual prosperity in Dr. Maya Angelou, but in the words of Tupac Shakur, we get a hint of what that journey looks like, how you get there, kind of by remembering who you are. And so I'd like to unpack that today. And I want to use as a framework the hero's journey. Those of you who remember literature class, or if you're into literature, you may recall that there's the hero's journey. It's something that's been a part of literature since Greek and Roman mythology. It was popularized by Joseph Campbell. I think he's the one that kind of codified it, but the themes of that have been part of movies and literature forever, and you really can see it in some of our most beloved stuff. Star Wars. We got any Star Wars fans? Hero's journey. Harry Potter, Hero's Journey, Wizard of Oz, Hero's Journey, yes, absolutely. Narnia, yeah, Hero's Journey. Green Eggs and Ham. If you think about it, the hero's journey is you have to go on an adventure, you have to overcome a challenge or challenges, and then you return transformed and changed. So you're going to tell me Sam I Am was not transformed after he did eat the green eggs and ham? And I think the reason that even in children's books, movies, or more diverse or complicated literature, these themes resonate with us is because I think they're bearing witness of something that's just true about the human condition and about the spiritual life. So I thought I would kind of take those themes of the hero's journey and let's just spend a little time on each part together this morning. Is that okay? Yes. All right, awesome. So what is the adventure? Because we're all on the adventure, and I would argue that the adventure is really life itself and all the circumstances that make that up. So that can be what we so-called good stuff, the victories, the wins, also the losses, things that are very, very hard, traumas and things of that nature. Or as Winston Churchill said, referring to the history of humanity, he called it one damn thing after another. Churchill, always the wordsmith, right? And sometimes it feels like that's what life is, one damn thing after another. But whether we would classify things as positive or negative or somewhere in between, that is the adventure that we're all on. So everybody here is on the hero's journey. It also includes our relationships. Also things that relationships that we would consider positive or healthy and ones that aren't so good. Relationship with partners, relationships with parents. This is all part and parcel of the stuff of the adventure of life. It could be external influences, what others say about us, for example, or internal, what we say about ourselves. Or it can be just traumatic stuff that happens by living in this world. The world does have, even though I believe the world is beautiful, and I believe that we're all worthy of love and respect, and I believe that life is an amazing thing, there is tremendous brokenness and pain that's part of the journey. So trauma would make up a part of this as well. And what happens when we go on this adventure and we start young, so it's really actually subconscious at first, is we start to form an idea of ourselves. We construct an identity, and we identify with that, and that becomes our way to kind of navigate life. We figure out a way to do this thing. And if you were, think back to your childhood, if you were a perfectionist, for example, that's your way of constructing an identity and trying to figure out how to navigate this thing so that you feel okay, so that you feel significant, so that you can make sense of the chaos. Or if you're somebody that you found like, wow, I can't ever tell anybody no. Chances are you're addicted to the approval of others. Guilty, by the way. But that's just another identity, just another way of creating a construct to navigate life because life's hard, and then we identify that and we make the mistake. This isn't a moral failure, it's just what happens. We make the mistake of thinking that's actually who we are. So, that brings us to the challenge. The challenge is you realize that, hey, that constructed identity or that methodology that I've figured out is no longer serving me, and I've got to let it go. For most of us, this happens in adulthood. If it happens at your 20s, you're really blessed. For most of us, it's later, 30s, 40s. And what happens is this. You've got all your stuff, all your techniques, all the things you think you figured out, and eventually, by God's grace, those things stop working. So you have this order that you've constructed, and life will not allow you to keep it. And it's very, very uncomfortable, but it's very good. It reminds me, speaking of Chronicles of Narnia, there's a scene, I think, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where they ask, Maybe it's Lucy's asking one of the other kids who had seen Aslan, the lion, is he safe? If you remember that, is he safe? And they said, no, he's not safe, but he's good. And I think that hints at what we're dealing with here. Like sometimes the safe stuff is harmful, and the dangerous stuff is actually the good stuff. But inevitably, it will stop working. And you are driven by God's grace to a new paradigm. So if you've had significant trauma or hard times in your life, you may have started developing beliefs since then of, hey, I can't trust anybody. So you have a wall, which is fine. It will keep you safe, but it is very lonely on this side of that wall. Or maybe you have the belief, well, now I don't believe the world is safe. I can't do this or that. I kind of have to just stay at home. Or maybe you haven't been through a lot of trauma, but maybe your parents who were well-intentioned, maybe they were a little too hard on you when you made a B or a C on your report card, and then that triggered something where you're like, I've got to nail this. I got to do this right. Well, eventually that next B or C comes, right? If you're a perfectionist, eventually you're not going to get it right. And if you're addicted to the approval of other people, eventually, believe it or not, somebody's not going to like you. It's true. Somebody's not going to like you. Although, Keith, I can't imagine someone not liking you.
That's my wife.
Okay. So you're driven to your knees by life circumstances, and you have to give up that order that you created, which may have served you for a while, but you're realizing this isn't going to get me through adulthood. This isn't going to give me the life I want. This isn't working. And then you're really struggling with the really all-important question, well, who actually am I? Without all the success or failures, or without the trauma story, or without the people-pleasing, what's underneath all of that? If you get down to the essence of who I am. And this is really one of the, I told you I love being a therapist, but one of the greatest parts of my job, because chances are, 9 times out of 10, if you come into my office, you're really struggling with your self-worth. You've been through a lot, and your self-worth is in the toilet. And I have these repeated conversations with client after client who have no problem showing compassion and love for their neighbor, friend, or whoever. But when you start talking about showing some love to yourself, it is the most uncomfortable concept. Like, it's just, you can see the squirming in the seat and the struggle. And one of the parts of my job that I love the most is reminding people of their dignity and their worth. Kind of like what Maya Angelou did with Tupac Shakur. I love being able to say, you're important. You matter. You're worthy of love and respect. But I don't care what you did. It was true from day one, and your mistakes and successes don't change the inherent worth and dignity. Or in the book of Genesis in the Bible, being made in God's image. That doesn't go away ever. But I've done this, but I've done that. You're still worthy of love and respect. You still have all of that good stuff that you had when you were a baby, when you couldn't do anything. You were totally dependent. There's a quote from Buddha that he says, you can search the whole tenfold universe and not find a single being more worthy of love and compassion than the one seated here, yourself. So, releasing this surface identity and embracing the truth of our identity in source, the vocabulary gets a little tricky here because sometimes the word God can be triggering, especially if you've had hard times in church. And I remember Richard Rohr, Father Rohr, talking about it. He says, I think he was quoting somebody else, but he was promoting the idea, maybe we should stop saying God for about 50 years so the word can lose its baggage and start meaning something again. But if you want to use source or spirit or Christ or whatever works, the thing is the words are just pointers. The words never, this is another Richard Rohr thing, all language about God is metaphor, period. It's always a point. The finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. I think is that another Buddhist quote, I think? Yeah, it's the same idea. So releasing that surface identity and embracing the truth of our identity in source, which is an identity of dignity, an identity of love, an identity of belonging, that is actually the gateway to spiritual prosperity, or if you want to call it the transformation or return of the hero's journey. Let's take a moment and talk about spiritual prosperity, kind of what it looks like and how we can nurture that. When I say spiritual prosperity, I'm curious what comes to mind. I wonder what you think of. I think of something like St. Paul's words in Galatians about the fruit of the Spirit. So someone whose life is full of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and gentleness and self-control. You see, I remembered all of that. I taught elementary school. There was a song that went with it, and we all remembered it. I also think of people whom I've had the privilege of knowing in my life who just had spiritual prosperity, and it was kind of hard to put your finger on it, but when you were around them, you felt lifted up. You always felt encouraged. You always felt seen and heard. My Aunt Abby was one of these people. She could make you feel like you were the only person. She was my great aunt. She could make you feel like you were the only person on planet Earth. And you left feeling like everything was going to be okay. You left feeling completely seen and not judged one bit. She was a wonderful person. I miss her dearly, but she is somebody that when I watch Maya Angelou, I think, oh, this is like my Aunt Abby. It's that same intangible quality of somebody who's at peace in their own skin. It's like she knows who she is. She's not anxious. She's not worrying. She's not fretting. You'll notice that spiritually prosperous people, they're not fear-based. They don't make decisions out of worry and fear. They're not judgmental. You can hang out with them. You can tell them everything. And there's no change in their countenance. It's still love and compassion. They're not fazed by it. I hope you've been able to hang out with somebody like this. They have no need to control anything. No need to manipulate. No need to make this happen or do this or go to this restaurant or leave by this. There's none of that. There's just an internal yes to the present moment, an internal acceptance of what is. And that's not to say they don't act wisely when they can, but before that ever happens, there's an internal yes. An internal yes to the present moment and just being. So, spiritually prosperous people are rooted in source, or God, or Spirit. And what happens is source expresses itself through them. That's why it's called the fruit of the Spirit. It's in our lives, but it's of the Spirit. And there's this connection, almost like an umbilical cord, of God flowing through you to other people. The way we can nurture this is really what this church talks about all of the time. Practices of stillness. That's why we do the guided meditation. I hope today in that moment you were able to enjoy some times of stillness. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just moments where your brain, even if for a fleeting moment, stops trying to replay the past or worry about the future and is just able to be. This church, the times that I have visited, has taught many practices. I remember, Terry, you taught about centering prayer, I think, in your sermon. Look that up, centering prayer. See if that's a good fit for you. The Latin phrase, lectio divina, spiritual reading or divine reading. Check that out. Try some different things and see what works for you. This is not a one-size-fits-all thing, but the main thing is just to find moments to be still. It doesn't have to be large amounts of time. It could be several times briefly throughout the day. Moments at work or in your car where you stop and you follow your breath just for a few moments. You can really access a stillness inside of you. And when you access the stillness that's deep inside of you, that's when you get closest to your true identity, closest to who you really are. That's the return in the hero's journey. That's the transformation. Does that make sense? Are you just being nice, or does it really make sense? Stillness is a way for us to live in the present moment, which is always present. It's never really the past or the future. It's always the present moment. When the future gets here, guess what? It will be the present moment. The present moment is really where the true adventure lies, and that's where the good stuff is. Amen?
Amen.
All right. Keith, I think you got some more ministry for us. Ladies and gentlemen, Keith and the team.